You ever get your ass beat so bad you turn 30? That's SIFU, a game I admittedly knew nothing about before going in, aside from the central gimmick. It's a martial arts brawler where every time you die, you age up a year. Hearing that alone, I was hooked. I said, stop the tape, I am sold. And I went out and immediately impulse bought this game, something I rarely ever do. I just had a good feeling about this one, and I am here to spread the good word. This game is incredible.
Shame I'll have to throw you back through it.
SIFU sees you on a classic kung fu quest for vengeance, where you are hunting down the martial art masters who betrayed your family. You start at the ripe age of 20 years old. Oh, hold on, I can't drink this yet. Then bam! Immediately you are thrust into your first brawl. And at first it doesn't seem so bad. Taking out enemies seems manageable enough, yet there's an immediate sense of danger with every encounter. And then quickly you get introduced to more enemies, either getting overwhelmed by a big group or just one hit you didn't see coming. Okay, let's try this again. So you start finding weapons, seeing what's in the environment. These are pretty OP. You start doing well enough and then oh shit, you just walked into an entire old boy hallway sequence. Finally making it to the first boss, I was a 22-year-old with the world ahead of me. By the time I actually beat him, I looked like B. Arthur.
Why don't I just wear a sign that says too ugly to live?
At a cursory glance, it might seem reminiscent of the rhythmic brawl we've seen in the Arkham games or Spider-Man, but SIFU feels a lot more locked in. You are much more vulnerable, and you can't afford to leave any room for an opening. You have to zero in until you eventually tap into this elegant dance of crowd control, combos, and finishers. It's so visceral and so thrilling every single time, and while there are a host of unlockable combos that certainly help alleviate some of the pressure and give you more to work with, you can still actively feel yourself getting better and better in a very clear way that is so exciting and so rare to see. Not because you found some OP sword or weapon or unlockable, not because you leveled up enough to do more damage, but because you got better. At the beginning of my playthrough, I saw there was a trophy for beating the game under the age of 25, and as soon as I heard that, I knew I had to pull it off. I had to become a master of Kung Fu. But avoiding death and staying young isn't just about bragging rights. There is quite a bit at stake that comes with aging in SIFU. For one, you could potentially lose health, and your death counter can multiply, meaning one small mistake can age you up almost a whole decade. Eventually, this can bar you from certain upgrades, things like one that improves your weapon durability that's only accessible if you're under 25. But SIFU in its brilliance is even kinda deceptive this way too, because those weapon pickups that seem OP at first, it seems like a no-brainer to upgrade these, but then as you become more adept, you realize that this is basically a flytrap for scrubs. See, later you'll find things like your focus bar upgrade or your parry upgrade are far more useful for later areas and bosses. And it's stuff like this that made me realize how mechanically brilliant SIFU is and the challenge it poses to the player. It's brutal, but it can be forgiving. It's a game all about wisdom, learning from the mistakes of your past and how we can get caught up focusing on the wrong things. And only until we can break through that cycle can we truly improve and grow. With some perseverance and hard work, you can eventually get to a point where you can quite literally sweep the floor with most enemies and bosses. The combat eventually evolves to become more environmental too, with your upgrades allowing you to interact and use whatever you can at your disposal. It gets pretty ridiculous. You can throw just about everything in the kitchen sink. Those weapon pickups that were once crutches you held firmly onto in the opening hours of the game, yeah, no, those become nothing but mere disposable cannon fodder for you as you hurl them at enemies in between blows. One upgrade lets you slide objects under an enemy's feet so you can topple them over and flatten their nose. The gameplay loop just quickly becomes absolute kung fu chaos with a method to it. The presentation here is also really top-notch. You have this gorgeous, somewhat cartoonish style with a really nice art direction, with every level having an instantly memorable color palette. Whether it's a booming neon-drenched nightclub or this blindingly white art gallery where you descend into deep blues and blacks, the way this game lets you infer many of its story beats visually with very little dialogue is really well done. SIFU can be challenging, sure, but there are plenty ways to make your successive run-throughs easier. You have shortcuts you can open up, and you can level upgrades up to a point where they're now permanent so you no longer lose them after you die, stuff like that. I can't tell you how thrilling and accomplishing it felt to walk up to that final boss, still age 20, not a touch of gray on me. And while I'm certainly leagues better at the game than I was, I have no delusions that it would have been a lot harder without some of the leeway the game offers. And I think that's also a testament to how well designed it is. Even when it's giving you wiggle room, that sense of growth you feel as a player is still exhilarating and very much felt, and plays really well into the game's central themes. It's beautiful, it's so deeply rewarding, and I don't know, I can gush about this one forever. It's quickly become one of my absolute favorites.
Match victory.
Coming off of my experience with SIFU, Rollerdrome was another game that immediately enthralled me just from one glance at the game's central gimmick. Imagine if Max Payne, Jet Set Radio, and Pro Skater got thrown into a blender with a big dystopian dash of the original Rollerball and George Lucas's THX. You are on roller skates pulling off cool tricks and shooting enemies in mid-air with bullet time. That's all I really needed to know. There's a constant momentum to the gameplay loop that keeps every run feeling buttery smooth. Like once your character starts moving, you're locked in a constant state of motion. You never have to worry about landing your tricks or jumps the right way. You'll always end up immediately rolling back into skating. And combat is made simple as you have an auto lock on nearby enemies at all times. This may sound like some of your agency is being taken away, but it plays immensely to the game's benefit, as it frees up your focus completely on pulling off the most stylish and graceful mid-air executions. You have to pull off tricks, grind rails, ride walls, and perfectly time your dodge for bonuses, and kill everything in sight. Like Jet Set Radio Future, it's a game that lets you constantly look cool in a way that's super approachable and arcadey. Being stylish isn't something locked only to players of high skill. Rollerdrome lets anyone do it as soon as they pick up a controller. Every stage is an arena of enemies and you perform combos Pro Skater style, with some small objectives to complete, and you can keep your combos going by killing enemies. Even just landing hits on them will afford you some extra time. And like SIFU, I really felt compelled to improve. There's just something about seeing your high score inch forward and just fall short with each run. I think the biggest challenge for me personally came from my own stubborn desire to find that right rhythm, to really perfect these levels. I mean, when the game is already giving you so much leeway to be a complete over-the-top I, Tonya with 2 Glocks, it can sting when it feels like you're not making the most of your environment and really driving up those combos. My one gripe, I guess, would be not being able to use the D-pad to pull off these tricks. You just can't get the same precision with your inputs with an analog stick. If you've ever played any Tony Hawk Pro Skater, you already know what I mean. With enough practice, though, enemies will no longer be the threat they once were, instead becoming nothing but mere props to your performance. They become mere instruments for you to keep your combos going, and I don't mean this to be a bad thing, as it becomes a game in itself, recognizing the opportune moment to dispose of each one between tricks. Like one tactic I had was leaving enemies whittled down to just 1 HP, so that if I ever saw my combo was going to run out, then I had a quick way to dispose of them. There's a nice relationship between tricks and combat like this, as pulling off more stunts unlocks you more ammo, shooting enemies drives your combo up, and so forth. It felt so gratifying to finally finish off a level and finally see that S-tier ranking, and just when you start to feel like hot shit, just when you start to feel like you've got it all down, you're thrust into a new arena with new enemies that constantly challenge whatever playstyle you previously adapted to until you're fighting the goddamn ED-209 from RoboCop. SIFU and Rollerdrome are just 2 games with very unique gameplay loops that are fun, challenging, and left me always wanting more, and I highly recommend them.
The world is watching. In Rollerdrome.
Clive N Wrench may seem like your typical indie 3D platformer starring the Nesquik Rabbit and Curious George, but there is a lot more behind this game. This is a title that's largely been developed by one guy tracing back to over a decade ago. It's been in development so long that it was originally meant to release on the Wii U. After many years, a Kickstarter that failed to get off the ground and online feedback, it's finally here, long after the resurgence of 3D platformers we saw many years ago with the likes of your ukuleles and Hats and Times, and it's kind of a blessing in disguise in a way. There's no pressure of resurrecting a dead dormant genre or what have you. Enough time has now passed that Clive N Wrench can just kind of stand on its own. Sure, it will no doubt, and already has been compared to dozens of other titles, but it doesn't need to be a massive leap. What you have here is just a really fun, cute 3D platformer. The game starts out with you as Clive McFly, your little monkey wrench, to stop the evil Dr. Dacus who's stolen your cousin Nancy's time machine to take over different eras of time. So you hop into a time-traveling fridge to stop him. There's this sort of stiffness to all the cutscenes, whether intentional or not. It really does feel like something you would see in a PS1 or N64 game, the way the characters slowly bob around, and I can't help but instantly be charmed by it, and that's a major through line throughout the entire experience. For better or worse, this is a 3D platformer with kind of a lot of jank and technical issues, but the sense of passion and love for the genre just pours through at every turn. This is a platformer that's clearly trying to evoke something from the days of N64, but to be honest, it more so reminded me of something you'd find deep within the PS2's library. You know, like an obscure platformer with a lot of fun to be had despite many flaws. And honestly, I think capturing that specific essence made Clive N Wrench feel even more special to me. What I immediately noticed and liked was just how no frills it is in its approach. You have a quick optional tutorial level that lets you play around with the game's moveset, and then you can immediately jump into a level and start collecting, with each themed era equipping the duo with a new outfit as a nice cute little touch. Clive has this sprint that allows you to quickly zip around levels. You can do a high jump and side flip, and it all feels very smooth in action. You can cover a lot of ground here very quickly, and it's not just limited to your sprint since you can barrel forward, double jump, and then wildly swing wrench around in an endless hover, granting you a ton of verticality and opportunity to reach distant rooftops in seconds. There was hardly ever a time I felt like I didn't have the tools to get to where I needed to go. The platforming allows so much room for speed and correction that I never felt like I lost a tremendous amount of progress whenever I didn't make a jump. There's no doubt an absolute dump truck of other games you can compare Clive N Wrench to, but that speed here alone feels solely unique and alleviates a lot of collectathon aspects that might feel like a chore in other games. It might not be the most polished indie platformer there is, but to me it was easily some of the most instantly comfortable. The different themed worlds and time periods you visit are full of a lot of charm, and I found most of them a lot of fun to move around in and explore. Here your main collectibles are these ancient stones tied to different aptly named objectives hinting you where they might be found, very similar to the old-fashioned Mario 64 approach. Some are simply hidden around the environment while others are more involved and recurring. Things like collecting keys or freeing 5 caged little critters or snatching one from your weird cracked out little cousin who speeds around the map like a little gremlin.
Oh, me. I was gonna smoke that.
You can feel the love this one was crafted with by how immediately charming each section is. The music, which I expected to just kind of fade into the background, ended up being really well done and beautiful. There are so many adorable little details to this game and its characters, but I gotta know, what's up with the horses here? They all look like they know something. Something they shouldn't.
What have you done? What have you done?
If there was one thing I truly didn't expect with Clive N Wrench, it was just how funny it was. It's rare that a game can actually intentionally pull off something to make me laugh out loud. One of the boss fights in particular was just genius. There is so much to love here, but I have to warn it does come with some caveats, and a lot of my issues do lean on the technical. For one, as fluid as the platforming is, I can't say the same for the frame rate. I played this on a beefy state-of-the-art PC gaming rig with a P90X quad-layer Warp Diffusion Hyperion Pro graphics card that had a cool robot on the cover, and Geek Squad. And even then, it was all over the place, with certain areas becoming super choppy without fail every time. As is 3D platforming tradition, the camera too can be erratic as hell. There were plenty of moments where I couldn't even see where I was, and making adjustments is so sluggish with no sensitivity options to make changes to your liking. There's also some pretty rough glitches, like more than once I just got trapped in the level geometry. There was even this one part where this simple block puzzle suddenly became insurmountable because one of them glitched into the floor, meaning I had to completely back out of the entire level. And even with so much platforming speed at your disposal to regain lost ground, this can pose even bigger problems. Like, there's this one part of the Egyptian level where you go inside this pyramid's interior, and you get to platform through all these puzzles with Lara Croft. There's like 4 different large rooms you have to hop through until you finally reach the top of the pyramid, and lo and behold, you're granted this pole, granting you the ability to get back to the top without having to redo all these sections. It felt like this nice moment where you earned a little extra reward for your efforts, except it's not permanent. The second you leave this level, it's gone, and you have to do everything all over again. Even though there's nothing left inside of these large rooms for me to collect. And practically every instance of levolution like this, where the world changes to make things easier for you, is stripped away, and it kinda sucks. Especially when you fall through the floor. Things happen that aren't your fault. I generally actually enjoyed a lot of the boss levels. They weren't always your typical straightforward fight. Instead, some would be like a gauntlet of enemies. The Wild West one is this awesome Toy Story 3 looking train sequence. The Ancient Greece level is a maze, things like that. I like that they mixed it up, and I found most of them to be a good time. The main issue comes from the combat itself, which feels very inconsistent. The first few hours of the game, it felt almost impossible to attack an enemy without losing a chunk of health yourself. Clive just doesn't have enough invincibility frames between attacks. Update. The game recently got a quality of life update, which has made the performance in combat much smoother, thank God. The boss stage of the pirate level in particular also supposedly has been fixed, but let me just tell you that for my day 1 playthrough, it was absolutely hell. With the game forcing you into this 2.5D angle in between jumps, totally throwing you off. I basically had to exploit the game's own jankiness to get through it my first time. It was easily the lowest point of Clive N Wrench for me, which is sad because the ambition of what the developer was trying to accomplish here was clear. This was supposed to be a very bombastic level with a nice rhythm to it, kind of like you'd see in a stage from Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, but it felt as if it was being held together by tape and horse glue. But I don't think these issues should detract from what Clive N Wrench gets right. Even after I was really frustrated, reaching the boss and getting a cute cutscene felt like a really I can't stay mad at you moment. There's just so much passion and charm imbued in many of the stages, and even when it is janky, the love you can tell the game was made with really shines through in a big way. I even ended up 100%ing the game, and in the best way a collectathon can be, it felt like an organic part of my playthrough and not some sort of completionist chore. I gotta say, I kinda adore this game. I love the movement, the feel of controlling Clive N Wrench just feels so natural, zipping through these colorfully themed worlds and swinging your gym partner as a monkey to hover your way to your next pickup. It always felt so satisfying to find a really well-hidden collectible on your own, or solve one of the more cryptic stones. I would hate to see these two relegated to only one game, because for now, I can only imagine how amazing a sequel building off of this one would be, with a potentially bigger budget and some extra polish. I really do hope we see Clive N Wrench again.
Never have gotten in this taxi!
The first time I watched The Fifth Element in its entirety was in 2009 on YouTube, divided into 10-minute parts at 240p with a watermark smacked in the middle, and even then I knew these cab scenes were cool as hell. A Mile High Taxi is a hot new indie game that takes those scenes and crosses them with the classic core gameplay of
Crazy Taxi!
Except now you fly a hover cab in a large futuristic city, picking up passengers and completing fares against the clock. It seems pretty damn cool, right? I mean, the closest thing we had to this before was playing the taxi minigame in San Andreas with the flying car cheat on. It's definitely an eye-catching concept that's sure to attract a lot of people based off that alone, especially since we've been starving for a new Crazy Taxi, with the last mainline game on consoles being Crazy Taxi 3 over 20 years ago. This is a chance to fill that void and bring that style of gameplay to the 24th century. So how well does it pan out? Well, for starters, you got this wide open map to pick up fares, complete with its own bustling hover traffic and these bizarre billboards of tomorrow. It's essentially Crazy Taxi with verticality to it, as you have to pick up and drop off passengers at specific levels of the city. It adds a pretty interesting new dimension to your rides, as some passengers will need to be dropped off at a higher elevation than where you picked them up, and vice versa.
Well, it took you long enough.
The more rides you complete, the more hyper boost pickups you unlock, which can be stacked on top of each other so you can really ramp things up to ludicrous speed. The problem here, though, is that the Crazy Taxi formula oddly doesn't translate too well. While clearly it serves as the game's main inspiration, it kind of becomes a crutch in a way, as there's just not enough here to keep things engaging, and not enough is done to build off that futuristic twist. If you've ever played
Crazy Taxi!
you'll know every moment feels intense, every second lost feels tremendous, with only a very fleeting sense of relief arriving when you finally reach the drop-off. You're never completely sure if you're gonna make it or if you're taking the best route possible until you've really done some trial and error. It can be pretty brutal with its mechanics, and the boost itself legit is physically painful to pull off after a while, but every second feels so fun and satisfying. It's a crazy game at its core, challenging but very rewarding. I never felt that sense of accomplishment or urgency with Mile High Taxi. I picked up the passenger, we flew around a bit, and I dropped them off with plenty of time to spare. That gameplay loop of going from point A to a vague point B in the fastest way possible just doesn't work the same when you have so much verticality to zoom straight to where you need to go, no problem. One of the biggest issues for me is the map itself. It's cool at a glance, but that wow factor quickly diminishes. There's hardly any notable sights or pathways. It's mostly just a wide open coruscant to cruise around in. It poses very little challenge, and that uncertainty that comes from Crazy Taxi, where in giant floating arrow we trust is your only guide, that element never really translates here, even though it's clearly meant to. Beyond those billboards too, the game is just missing a lot of personality. Where's the weird tubes of traffic to fly through? Or dare I say it, where are the power couplings? Where are the obstacles? There's no danger or intrigue or cool futuristic architecture, it's all just kind of flat. There's no real incentive to learn this map since every corner and pathway essentially looks exactly the same. And being that this is the only environment in the game, it's kind of disappointing. The core concept may be borrowed from Crazy Taxi, but Mile High can't seem to match any of its style or playful intensity. I got so bored to a point where most of my fun came from holding down the boost button non-stop and watching my cab ping-pong around erratically.
Here goes nothing.
You suck at driving!
Stop your whining!
It is worth noting, of course, that this game, much like Clive N Wrench, was made by a single developer, and I do think conceptually it is a good starting point for those hungry for a new Crazy Taxi type game. But it just desperately needs more to shake up the gameplay and push it to a point where it does feel unique or challenging or interesting in its own way, because for now, there's just not much here. Maybe with some updates and tinkering I could see this building into something truly special, but for now, it feels like a brief demo of what could be.